I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. Welcome everybody, come on in. Good morning. I wanted to change up the vibe a little bit, pun intended, on the sort of somber headline and discussion. Yeah, keep me right there. Right there, everybody, wait a minute. Because as is always the case, we're going to smile, we're going to dance, we're going to live our lives and have a good time, even as we get a little critical, get a little... I was going to say something else, but get a little involved. Even as we struggle, we're going to have a little bit of fun. So greetings, everybody. Come on in. Let everybody know you're here. Put this in your socials. As we listen to this little bit of Vibe Band and Mark Anthony remix. I'm going to smile. I'm going to dance. I'm going to live my life. It's a friendly battle. It is what it is. There's no competition. I can't compete with him. And if you go check him out, I'm not mad. You can come back and check this out later. Diallo is must-see TV. But this morning we're going to get into, I'm going to sort of set the stage this morning with a discussion of the hip hop narrative and its death, and perhaps resurrection in the most odd of places, as I'll come to. But initially, I just wanted to keep it all black. I should have even worn the darker BPM shirt, because from my experience at the Howard University panel on Friday to watching the Netflix series that I know Ear Doctor and everybody wanted us to watch, and that will be discussed later today with its director, Dream Hampton, coming on RSTV. I'm just again disturbed by the narrative and wanting to address that this morning a little bit. To that end, by the way, Guerrilla Intellectual University will resume in early September. We got to reframe and reorganize the schedule. I didn't even expect to be available today. My Mondays are no longer an option. And we'll come back and talk about the details on this too, because the low intensity warfare with my institution it is ongoing, and this time it has taken the form of a 5-day-a-week schedule, which anyone involved in academia knows. I know to the working world what that sounds like, but in the academic world, that's for a tenured full professor going into his 18th year at the institution with an unblemished record, by the way. There is nothing that they could put in print to condemn me. So, oh man. So we got to make some adjustments here. Yeah, we're going to be making some adjustments for sure. Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. But that's why also I've invited folks, will continue to go to iMixWhatILike.org. And if you have any experience with HBCUs as a parent, student, faculty, admin, staff, any other form, feel free to participate. You'll find the link right there to the Not a Different World project. I am continuing. It is ongoing. Discussed it a little bit on Friday, as a matter of fact, with my co-panelists. And that's where I'll start. Big shout out to Dr. Mcia Clark and Joshua Wright, who been convening hip hop conferences and panels at Howard University for a long time, and they invited me to participate in this 50th anniversary commemoration conference that was being at Howard, housed and held at Howard this weekend. I got to go bring my youngest daughter with me, which is always fun. And we got to show up there, which for her, though she's a couple years away still, was interesting because that Friday was also first year students moving in day, and so the campus was buzzed. It was packed, very difficult, more than usual to find parking. So we ended up taking a nice stroll through the city on our way to get to the panel and back, which was also interesting. What gentrification has and has not completed just yet, and very reminiscent, by the way, of where we were in downtown Panama not too long ago, when the class gentrification, and you could argue it could be a complexion based one as well. Though Panama, we got to really come back and deal with that at some point because the racial dynamics is very different. But certainly a class form of gentrification taking place uh, in downtown Panama. You could see where the remnants of the unmovable poor were still there. Same kind of thing happening right there on Seventh and Georgia, down up and around Howard University and downtown. So as we walked uptown from where we parked, there was we got to reminisce about that. I got to go past where Cafe Mamonage, rest in peace, used to be, and where a lot of my own activism and work used to take place, and where the new Howard Theater is, and as we experienced the relaxed and new rules around cannabis were in full effect because I did not intend to introduce my youngest to the world of cannabinoids, right? But on our walk, it was unavoidable. Cats were out in full force on the block, sometimes taking up the entire block, you know. So that was another contradiction for me as well. But uh, we get up to the panel, and shout out to Teodros, brother T from Bowie State, who was on the panel with me, and Dr. Velma Lapointe. And I'm looking it up now. Oh, because I knew it was going to happen too. The sister's name just slipped my mind. Um, another. Uh, oh, what? Oh, and then she doesn't use her name in her email. Oh, it's slipping my mind. Oh man, this is terrible. Uh, anyway, uh, oh, and by the way, I heard about the shows that I missed at Reach and the Smithsonian, the African American History Museum that was there. A lot of good folks, and I'm going to come back to that in a minute too. Were performing. Moo Fresh was there. A lot of really good people were we're not. I don't think we're listed under the speakers. I don't think only the super keynote speakers were listed. So I can't find this. This is terrible. This is terrible. And I needed to know it too because she ah. But anyway, so there was a lot of good stuff happening. I'm going to come back to a little bit of that as part of a segue into what I wanted to talk about this morning in just a second. But I was hoping I was hoping it would come to me, and then I thought I had it right here, and then of course she doesn't. This is my fault. It's my fault. It's just so I'll have to come back to that and find her name. Anyway, but Oh, because it was perfectly indicative of so as we're but anyway, so I'll come back to some of that in just a second. But as we're walking up to the panel, I said to you know, I was talking with my daughter, and I said, this is what I expect will happen because I've been on so many of these panels, and so much of what did occur ends up occurring, which is that uh, more defense will be made abstractly around the performative blackness and black excellence and the ability of African people to continue to overcome and to thrive and to overcome challenge. And very little will be said about the specifics of hip hop history, the impact, more specifically on the material conditions of African people, and the absence of mythology. So and that's basically what ended up happening, and that invariably ends up causing some sort of discord between me and my co-panelists. And it's been happening for literally decades, and it's unavoidable. And no matter how I feel like I try to approach it, the end result is very similar. Uh, Over years, I think I've developed a way of dis a little bit disarming and de-escalating. I'm a little less quick with my own temper, and I think a little more professional in my delivery. But invariably, the results end up being the same. And ultimately, it comes down to this, and this is where I'll make this segue and show you here, because I have profound respect for this brother and his crew, DJ Sonic, who was, among many other things, one of the soul controllers. He's really a legendary DJ. I want to say, particularly in the DMV, here in the DC, Maryland, Virginia, and University of Maryland area. But I think it's far beyond that at this point. And I had the pleasure of being a colleague of his and some others. Though I know that not all of them, and I don't want to front, like not all of the crew fully appreciate me as much as I do, and I think I should be. And I walked in on one or I remember one in particular. I walked into the studio and caught one of his boys talk a little grimy about me with one of my colleagues. But I think I took the high road, probably pun intended, and you know let it not become what I think I would have been in my right to allow it to become. But in trying to be more mature, try to be, and I've never been, I've walked away far more from fights than I've engaged them, and in some ways punked out more than I've engaged, at least by my definition. I don't. There's a couple memories I'm not fond of in terms of when I chose to walk away and when I didn't. But in this instance, but that said, I have profound, even for this dude I'm thinking of here, I have profound respect for their skill and for their contribution, particularly in this area, to hip hop. And but when I saw this on Instagram, this sort of spoke to and speaks to a lot of what I find to be a problem, whether it's the image here, but really it was the line here, and that he says, and I get it, because I'm sure the show last night was bananas, where he says the last time we partied at the Reach was a whole movie. This time we are celebrating 50 years of hip hop and a movement that changed the world. And that's the phrase that I keep seeing and that got my attention on this one. Again, this is not a shot at him. It is merely me making a point, because I do follow Sonic. I'm a profound fan of his work and his entire crew. Shout out to Bushhead Ed as well. And but so it's not personal. It's that this is the narrative that I continue and have always struggled with. Um, and yeah. So, and what I wrote here as a note to myself is that, because it's similar to what I'm going to end up saying about the Netflix series on hip hop and women, that directed by Dream Hampton, who I know is going to be on the platform with Kalanji at 4 o'clock today. I believe it's 4 o'clock today, Eastern time. Um, so this is not a diss, but this is the note I wrote. The narrative issue is that the narrative should read as follows: hip hop, a paradoxically beautiful Pan African cultural expression that emerged as an unsanctioned response and expression, was eventually, immediately, forcibly transfigured by the preceding colonialism, settler, internal, into what it has become in its popular form, a sanctionable expression of blackness and gender politics, given equally paradoxical credit for having helped create a world no one should want credit for. The paradox is simply that the material conditions of black and brown people are as bad or worse than before, certainly are not commensurate with the popularity and wealth generated by their labor and genius. The paradox is that we are hearing mostly from those who have been most rewarded by the state, the commercial advertising conglomerate owned world, to now be the lions telling the story of their own hunt from the perspective of the hunter. And that's the Fanonian paradox right there. That the colonized cultural expression is not one that is destroyed, as Fanon pointed out. It's ossified, as he said, in a colonial form that is used to testify against the people themselves. And that's what's happening. We're now hearing from the lions but they're telling the story of their own hunt still from the perspective of the hunter. And because the lions are the ones telling the story, we're assuming it's the story of the lion. We're assuming we're hearing the lion's tale, and we're hearing not that. So erased in all of this discussion, just a few things that I even predicted and was arguing against in the first place. So the whole era and history of hip hop activism is being erased. We don't hear about any of those struggles. Why? Because the grand narrative has to be that hip hop brought black and brown people and America out of a stagnant, dormant place and into something brand new and better. So to include focus on the history of hip hop activism, mostly popularized in probably the late 90s and the 2000s, you would have to acknowledge the arguments being made there about the corporate takeover, the consolidation of radio and playlists, the imposition of negative imagery, the distortion and removal of radical politics. All of that history is ignored. As I was saying in the piece about Ebro and Sister Ole the other day, you praise Ebro and ignore Hot 97 as an entity and its horrific impact. You ignore Ebro's complicity and participation in Smackfest and all the struggles around that. People were in the streets protesting that. Also ignored in all of this, even as they include some scholars in these discussions. And I'm talking about Netflix, I'm talking about PBS, I'm talking about Hulu, all the stuff that's linked in the show description that I know I've been covering and watching. All ignores the hip hop scholarship that emerged over the last several decades. And again, I don't agree with not almost, with a bunch of it, but it doesn't matter. My point is, it's ignored in these discussions as even existing. The perspectives, the debates, the history of it, the credit to women, Geneva Smitherman in particular, who's often credited as a foundational black woman scholar on the, like all of that, even in the discussion of hip hop and women, is left out. The women who led all the activists and radicalizing and organizing are left out, including in terms of hip hop scholarship, the point being made about hip hop itself, the institutionalization of the genre and the genreification, the colonial origins of genre in the academy. All of that's ignored. To a lesser extent, even in an assessment of hip hop journalism, as I somewhat tried to do in my Tucker argument linked in the show description, all of that is ignored or sidelined. So just a couple places that I also, to sort of to ground where I'm starting from. Just some simple things that are also ignored, in particular in this piece about women, but in hip hop in general. Just something from the Bronx Times. It was the end of last year, December 2022. The South Bronx, where everything started, hip hop, still the state's most impoverished and unemployed county. That is the South Bronx, comprised of 98% Black and Latino families, where more than 40% of the region's children live in poverty. One of the most poverty stricken and job needy districts in the country. Unemployment rates among young adults also run along racial lines, with young Black adults 18.5%, Hispanic and Asian both 23% unemployment rates compared to their white counterparts, which still, for any group, white included, is enormous. So even white folks in the South Bronx don't have jobs. 16% unemployment. So just a quick start, just a quick overall, never mind all the other stuff. Black wealth headed to zero by 2053. All the other stuff, surveillance, incarceration, all of it, all of it. What is this, what is the changed world? So if anything, the change has to be understood in the context of those in power have been forced to adjust the ways in which they manipulate. The change is that hip hop has become a major disseminator of fantasy, mythology, and the grand US narrative of rags to riches, and anything can happen here and only in America. So but none of that is brought up, even passingly. Like, it seems like it's just ignored altogether. Um, Specific to women, just very quick uh looks at the situation here. What did I mean to highlight here? Anyway, everything is skewed racially and by gender. Um Even when they talk about Black women increasing relative to before, in terms of access to jobs and degrees, et cetera, and so forth, here we still find Black households at the bottom for what they define as total assets or or wealth, 33,000. But as we've talked about with Diedrich Muhammad and others, if you look carefully at these numbers, it's probably much lower than that, because they're what did he say? They count things like I forgot how he explained it, but he said that the numbers are closer to 11,000, and I had found where it's closer to 6,000. But even still, relative to white at 100 and almost 50,000, Black wealth is not said to be going anywhere. What was the reason I didn't highlight anything on this one? Anyway, in 2007, the average total house assets for households led by college-educated Black women under 35 was 114,000. In 2019, the average total assets had fallen to 33,000. So if you're in a household led by a college-educated Black woman under the age of 35, you're down to $33,000 in terms of total assets. That's probably more like what that graph was pointing to. The average total assets for Black women has decreased 37% between 2007 and 2019. That's probably what I was meaning to highlight there. So overall, and then there's a little bit more here. Black women are not doing well. And remember in the early 2000s when that stat came out about Black women Black working age women being worth, Black and brown Black working age women being worth $5. Well, it's not entirely true apparently. In an update, but close to it. So, in other words, what they're saying here, despite you might be looking good and everything is, you might, got your credit card out and everything, you got your Dolce and Gabbana on. According to this study that came out, and I haven't vetted it, but according to what is, and so this is always dicey, admittedly, but the study was from, oh man, the Center for Community and Economic Change based economic development for Center for Community and Economic Development based in Oakland. The total investment for her look is $2,000, but this woman looks great, even though her total net worth, if she's 18 to 35, is $100. If she is 36 to 46, $5. The Black woman has overcome almost every obstacle without breaking a sweat. She has nursed the master's children at her breast while her children were taken. She has conquered the feats of every profession. The Black woman can be named as lawyers, professors, doctors, judges, politicians, senators, secretary of state, and even the first lady of America. While she has done wonders in areas of professionalism, there's still room for improvement in wealth development. When compared to women of different ethnicities, Black women are at the bottom of the totem pole. So I just a little bit wanted to bring in some of the material conditions of the people being discussed in all of this. So then I got to my panel. Let me get my notes here real quick. And I put a clip up that my daughter got on her phone. And unfortunately the timing was bad. We were rushed. There wasn't, there were four of us on the panel. So we already know what that means in terms of time. Uh, so as I'm listening to the initial question about why we got involved in hip hop education, and the two older sisters were talking about their experience pre hip hop and how they had already been doing this work in the classrooms and teaching about Black people and Black youth. And then when hip hop emerged, they grafted their work onto that. And this one, oh man, what this is so bad that I don't have her name in front of me. And even in these emails, I just owe her so many apologies. Um, but let's see. Let me try one more thing here. Conference agenda. But these only have bits and pieces. And nobody puts, let's see. And then what happened to that full schedule with everybody's name on it? All right, wait, does this have it? Does this have it? Does this have it? Rise of Hip Hop 115. Hip Hop and I. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. My apologies. So it was Dr. Velma Lapointe from Howard University and Dr. Elizabeth Clark Lewis from Howard University, and Teodros Williams from Bowie State, and myself, moderated by Joshua Wright. So Dr. Elizabeth Clark Lewis, in sharing her story, starts talking about how essentially it becomes, I'm oversimplifying here, a Black excellence praise song, where she talks about how one of her former students, Dr. Jelani Cobb, is now the dean of journalism at Columbia and had his career. How she got to work with AJ of AJ and Free fame when he came down and would teach, a course at Howard, coming down from New York, even during the height of 106 in Park. And though she thought he was hostile to the students and mean, she appreciated that, um, and anyway. So when it finally became my turn to talk, and I think I was last, I started off with I made some notes quickly as they were talking. I thought this would have been a better way of doing it if I had fleshed it out, and I should still continue to do that. Or if anyone else has done it better, please let me know. But I started trying to think of, well, I'm not going to have a lot of time, so what would I want to say very quickly? And what I was trying to do is to say, well, let's assess this 50-year-old being, if in fact we're trying to understand where we are with hip hop. So my point was simply that with all the good that is being said by my co-panelists about what has happened and the ability for to find new ways to teach about blackness and personhood and womanhood and identity and whatever we were doing and was being said, I said, um, hip hop in its middle age, which is probably old, given it's still of black origin. Middle age for black people is still slightly old. Uh, has no health care, no pension. Like most workers, does not own its own home, does not own its own uh, apparatus for distribution and production and celebrity formation, does not own the wealth it produces, like most working people, black in particular. It's still exploited by white corporations and rumor mongering by white podcasts like Vlad TV and those trying to do what he's doing, even in blackface. It's still governed by the rules of settler colonialism in terms of popular form, branding, capital, identity formation, producing ease and comfort for the settler and dis-ease and hostility for its progenitors. And Dr. Clark Lewis's response was immediately polite, I guess friendly, politely hostile and interruptive, and wanting to. She said, "I want to challenge you." And my point was simply to say, yes, I'm very familiar with these arguments, particularly of those of the people you pointed out, like Jelani Cobb and others, because I've been disagreeing with them for decades. In fact, it's like 20 years ago, but I think the last time we were in the same room together, Jelani Cobb was on a panel, and I, from the audience, challenged what was being said on the panel because they were doing the same thing, ignoring. And I remember specifically raising the point: you all are ignoring the fact that three companies own everything and determine all the popularity and make all the money, and that the black communities producing this are poor. It's the same argument I've been making that is, and I've not seen a defeater for, in terms of the people who want to defend the celebratory nature of the narrative. I don't see a defeater for those basic points. If the people who are themselves the originators are poorer or worse off today, or at least know better, if at best know better, then what is the celebration? We can't continue to celebrate the handful of people who are selected by the state for their performance, in Jelani Cobb's point, for accepting the false narrative that hip hop by and large has done good for black people and created wealth for black people and fame and has changed the world into something that would allow for an Obama, as opposed to being condemned and criticized for participating in a process that would allow for a world in which an Obama could exist as an exemplar of black radical politics or black politics at all. And leaving out the fact that while, yes, there's always going to be a handful of people who are, through celebrity, et cetera, made relatively very comfortable and famous, that the collective of the collective go backwards. And that's why that Lorraine Hansberry comment from years ago always, though I never remember properly, always sticks with me. When she was asked, well, if you are a celebrity and you are doing well, then why are you complaining about the rest of your community? And she was saying, for you to forsake the abstract for the specific is in this case an error. Something to that effect. It was much more beautifully said. But the point is for you to ignore the abstract, the broad reality of Black life, so because you can point to the specific success of me, that's an error. And that's yet what keeps happening here. So for all that hip hop has done, we get Jelani Cobb as the dean of Columbia University's journalism school, while the Harlem community that Columbia is next to is gentrified and has no more Jelani Cobbs in it. I mean, what? Um, right, and I said, by the way, that as we were assessing this 50-year-old being, just like many of us who hit middle age, we falsely claim to have done what we've never done, and in this case, like hip hop freeing us. Instead, all that has happened is we've created a neo-colonial elite and a set of spokespeople who speak fraudulently on behalf of the Black political condition and struggle. So, as I'm going to come back to in just a second, even when Dr. Elizabeth Clark Lewis started praising the fact, I think several of my colleagues were praising the fact that we now have hip hop studies and hip hop professors. We have this is sort of the point I was getting at earlier, but because the grand narrative does not allow for an exploration of that fact, we don't look carefully at what hip hop scholarship has been produced. What are the arguments? What good has that been? What does it mean when disciplines like Black studies and Africana studies become incorporated and institutionalized absent radical political struggle outside the institution? Like none of these things are part of they're in the hip hop academic debate and discussion and discourse, but they're not part of the grand narrative. You wouldn't, you could watch all of these, you could watch all of this happening and have zero idea that hip hop scholarship even exists, much less had anything to say. Had to make a note. Don't let me forget about, I just heard from Wendy Day. I wonder if anybody remembers that name. Anyway, so I also, part of what also brought this friendly disagreement with Dr. Clark Lewis and myself was that I made the point that one of the problems when we don't investigate this hip hop academic reality or the academic reality is that we miss things like when she talked about AJ coming down to Howard and being hostile with his students, even as she said he was trying to do good work. My point was this is what ends up happening, as I've witnessed in my own experience, where relative celebrities are brought in to teach classes, but that's not what they wanted to do. For the most part, they're given big checks or bigger checks, and they're given, room that most faculty don't get, and they're, and by my experience, brought in to defend the administration's hostility towards existing faculty because they themselves don't experience that hostility, and then because they don't have as their initial desire teaching or academic pursuits, and they're only there because their favored career path has gone astray or gone awry, they do engage a hostile relationship with students and their fellow faculty. Now, Dr. Clark Lewis pointed out that AJ did this for free. I'm very interested to learn more about the details of why he would be teaching at Howard, how that would happen, and why he would have been doing it for years, apparently for free. But my point would still be that whatever his reasons are, they don't emanate from his first choice being an educator or being engaged in higher education or academia or whatever. She pushed back on that as well and then made the point, again, as many continue to do, that Chuck D had once accurately said that hip hop is Black people's CNN. And that's why it's so important. And again, I'm not, I think this sometimes gets lost in my critique. I'm not condemning hip hop and I'm not condemning people for creating hip hop. I love it. That's not the point. I'm condemning the narrative that it has done something it has not done in terms of changing the world and making real material, meaningful impact in the world in a positive way for particularly already colonized, disenfranchised, oppressed Black and brown people. It can't be expected to do that, as wonderful as it is, because there has been no change in social relationships, and hip hop has been largely put to the work of the pre-existing colonial situation. So my point was, and has been for years, yes, hip hop has become Black people's CNN. If by that we understand what CNN really is, a pharmaceutical industry, military industrial complex industry, manufacturing industry, propaganda arm, disseminator of news and views of the world of that ruling elite, then yes, hip hop is Black America's CNN, because it is a false representation of the world, targeting Black people as the audience with a worldview almost entirely arranged and organized by the military industrial complex, the white supremacist capitalist colonial settler arrangement. And that's why, as I keep saying, when we hear about all these celebratory moments, we're hearing mostly from those who have been well rewarded and selected and held up. Not because they're untalented, not because they're stupid or mean or bad people, simply because they don't offer messaging and symbol and imagery and politics that are threatening. Nor should they be expected to, I think. But that's another point of contention as well. Um, So when she mentions, one or another becoming a curator at a museum, something I'm going to come back to in a moment, or that is Clark Lewis in our back and forth, or Jelani Cobb's rise, or this artist or that artist, it doesn't matter to me. That is always the case in a neo-colonial arrangement. That is always the case. Anyway, so that's where I started on Friday. It was a very quick, a short panel. It was politely and in a funny, friendly ways, but still yet contentious, based on this my hostility to this grand narrative. And so at one point, Dr. Clark Lewis is even saying to me directly, uh, more or less, that I'm diminishing and denying. And this is she didn't say the word agency, but this is really what this is the buzzword that used to always come up in arguments against mine. It's never to defeat my argument, because it's a misguided one, but one that is based in the agency of African people, that African people continue to overcome, continue to. But just as I read in that report about the material conditions, Black people are always going to, yes, produce wonderful this, that, and the third. But so what if the material conditions don't change? If the oppressive conditions don't change? If the need to overcome some oppressive condition is still there? Who I'm not moved as much by a permanent ability to overcome horrific conditions, as we never actually address and get rid of those conditions, or we are encouraged to take comfort in the rewards given to the handful. I'm I, I'm just not moved by that. I just don't find that to be a sound approach, or argument. It doesn't mean we can't appreciate hip hop. It doesn't mean we can't appreciate what Black people do in general. But we just, I think, have to distinguish what that means in terms of political struggle, material conditions, and this thing about what does it mean that it changed the world. All right. So then I did watch this. I've been watching as much as I can. And I'm going to come to, but at the end of this, a very odd place where I think I found some hope, which is really weird. Um, but I did watch a series on Netflix about hip hop and women, directed by Dream Hampton, very talented legend herself in terms of hip hop history, in terms of Malcolm X grassroots movement. I would much rather we be discussing a Netflix series that's an expansion of her Malcolm X grassroots documentary. that came out some years ago. Had the pleasure of interviewing her once. Shout out to Lori Robinson, who set up an interview where you can. I didn't put that in the link in the show description, but I interviewed Dream Hampton once about the politics of biraciality. And she said something I always quote, actually, where she said something to the effect that she said, "My acceptance of a black identity is no more a dismissal of my white mother than my acceptance of a feminist identity is a dismissal of my father, my male father." And I always liked how she put that. I always appreciated how she put that. Um, we could not arrange to have her contribute to the Alive Reinvention anthology, which was the previous time I had reached out to her. But uh, but I will say I just disagree with, again, my point from the beginning that, as I was saying in response to the post from Ja Sonic, and maybe I didn't make this as clear as I meant to, as I wrote here, but yes, hip hop changed the world, but in ways we understand differently. So whereas I would focus mostly on the change being in hip hop being used to more confuse and distort the messaging of radical politics, the delivery of radical politics, the impact of radical politics has been turned against the people in its popular form. Uh, Others are more celebratory in terms of what we've already discussed as it has done. So I'm watching this series. Um, oh, I had one more. I did have one more piece about the material condition, but it's mostly the same stats. Um, Let me just, I did start this section with that. Just pull them up here. For instance, single black women household heads with a college degree have 38% less wealth than $5,000, and single white women without one. Among married women who are the head of household, black women with a bachelor's degree have 79% less wealth at 45,000 than white women with no degree. White women with no degree. Wow. And 83% less wealth than those with one. Wow. Marital status and education do not close the gap. So again, just another example of how the anyway, then they get into some silly solutions. Home ownership, which we already know doesn't do this either, but you told us to get an education, that don't close the gap. You tell us to buy a home, that don't close the gap. You tell us everything you tell us to do, but the revolution. Anyway. So the thing starts off, and my point with the material conditions, because the Netflix series starts off with you hearing the repeated refrain, "Black women are crushing it in hip hop right now, ultimate influencers of the culture." So I'm just going to go through my notes here relatively quickly, and then I'll obviously come back and check the chat for comments, criticisms, etc. in a little bit. And they start off immediately talking about Sylvia Robinson being a black woman who signed and created the Sugar Hill Gang and brought us that initial big hit. Uh, um, and but my note here is that this is again the epitome of sacrificing class analysis for gender, because there's no criticism of what Sylvia Robinson was actually doing. She was not there. She did not care about, she didn't have some grand concern about black people. She was already in the music industry. She was hustling in the music industry. She was struggling to hustle within the music industry and found a lane. So she created a fugazi group called the Sugar Hill Gang, put some other people's rhymes and other people's mouths and put this band together and put them out and made money and gave us the first big rap hit. Hip hop, the hippie to the hippie, the hip hop, don't not rock it to the, and gave us a great track. And out the gate, it was a commodified corporate capital. And because it's a black woman, we're just supposed to ignore that fact. And then as they do point out, in the documentary, to its credit, that she also did cast white women in the videos, but because to sell the song to a white audience and to sell hip hop to a white audience, but she's praised for this in the documentary for her business acumen. So again, nationalism, nationhood is erased, racial politics are erased, class analysis is erased, and it's reduced exclusively to this one woman. I don't even think ultimately they care so much that she's black, for a false concoction and a false presentation of falsity, all to sell to white audiences and make money. So so what new narratives are for black? And then they said that she helped create new narratives for black womanhood. And I said, I'm like, and then they do the same thing. Queen Latifah's mentioned. And I'm saying again, Queen Latifah gets way too much credit for one lady's first track, and then later coming back a couple years in the 90s to tell mostly black men, don't call women bitches. And she's given way too much credit for this, and all to ignore all the other cultural appropriation transmission, that is, in terms of the Revlon commercials, the mainstream commercial movies where she's her now portraying another law enforcement type character. I mean, the if she's praised for the fists up, why isn't she challenged or questioned for never doing it again, and never rocking an African hairstyle again, and never doing that again? And yes, black men should not be calling women bees. But sort of as a theme of this series is the if you're not going to talk about colonialism and capitalism and white supremacy, and you're not going to talk about corporate intervention, and you're not going to talk about oppression in any meaningful way, then it does a disservice to just simply make the thread of the series be that these black women rappers were challenging the misogyny of black men in their communities, while never raising the question that this was being done under the auspices of white owned record labels, with white wealth being what is increased as black wealth and brown wealth is erased. It just doesn't it feels false to me, admittedly, as a man. So I'm here for the criticism, but it just doesn't seem, the criticism of misogyny and black male patriarchal behavior is not properly contextualized, just not properly contextualized. And then we get more of the look at how Obama brought rappers to the White House, as in, and they did it this way, as, oh man, this was so slick, presenting Obama as the anti Bill Clinton by bringing rappers to the White House in an anti Sister Soldier moment. So in other words, if you know the history, Sister Soldier used by Bill Clinton to get his anti-black bona fides for his white voter base. So she's thrown under the bus and condemned, and yet not included in these series for interviews. Why is that? I would love, maybe it'll come up today at 4 o'clock when Dream is on with Kalanji. Why is Sister Soldier not in these series? I don't see her in any of them. But then because Obama brings rappers to the White House when he's elected, even though he is himself an offshoot of the Clinton machine, the Democratic Leadership Council, the right wing of the Democratic Party, the false presentation of progressivism while not doing a damn thing for anybody but more war and more poverty. Obama is brought up again as hip hop has changed the world, where he will bring rappers to the White House as a positive. Now, of course, the rappers he's bringing, we're not having bringing the politics that Sister Soldier was bringing politically back in the '80s, that in the '90s that got Clinton and everybody so scared. But yet it's presented as if those rappers are just as politically radical as she was, and that Obama inviting them to the White House is a positive. So Cardi B is fighting the power because she uses her platform, not her music, as they say, but her other platforms to engage in politics. And this is somehow her fighting the power. Then they do the whole fashion thing where fashion gets involved and body empowerment and all of this, again, something I've always struggled with. What is it? It seems to me an odd line to draw that it's this whole thing of if it's the same way I feel about black people claiming the N word, women claiming the B word, this idea that women still taking their clothes off and talking raunchy about sex and sexual performance is them empowering themselves. Again, not adjusting the material relationship, not adjusting the relationship in terms of ownership and the industry structure, but somehow white corporations benefiting materially off of women taking their clothes off and proudly being overly and hypersexual is empowerment. I don't, So then they make us, there's a strong section in here about complexion and how darker skinned women are getting more notoriety, but again, not in the context of, sure, now we have more dark skinned women performing a blackness that is acceptable to white capital investment and colonial society. So they even passingly, it's real slick, while saying nothing again about the material conditions of women, throw in a line about how Michelle Obama can become a positive reference for darkness. Nothing about her politics, nothing about the Obama impact on an even more unequal black community. Just her positive being she's darker. Same thing with El Boogie, the wonderful Lauryn Hill. She's praised for the miseducation of Lauryn Hill and her being a dark-skinned, beautiful woman. And we all, those of us remember, that was a wonderful moment. I saw her show live twice. My man brought the Fugees to our undergrad, and I saw them there as well. Lauryn Hill's live performances are some of the best shows of all genres that I've ever seen in my life. But there's no discussion of what happened to her since, how there's been no replication of both that form of a beautiful dark skin and hyper talented and politically minded artist. There's no discussion of what happened to her career. There's no discussion of what happened to her personal life. There's no discussion of what happened, more importantly, to the collective condition of Black women and people. There's also no discussion of the controversy over how much credit did she take for that album. She lost lawsuits, if I remember correctly, over taking too much credit for that album. So in this rush to praise her for being the only Black woman rapper to win a Grammy or Best Album of the Year or whatever I should say, it was more of a collective effort. Then something really weird happened. I'm skipping ahead just a little bit. Then you get, but this is weird to me. Then they cut to MC Light and she says hip hop is being put in museums because, quote, they don't want erasure. They want artists to be recognized. And I said, going back to my, again, to no disrespect to her, anyone else personally, but this is a fundamental misunderstanding of what's happening. And I wrote it down. I rewound it about 5 times to get the exact quote and make sure I got it exactly right. MC Light says hip hop is being put in museums because they don't want erasure. They want artists to be recognized. And then she names out specifically Black women artists. And this is where I'm saying this is where. So I went and I put the link already in the show description to some other work on this topic around museums, but I went and read another article on the subject. I think I literally paused the series right there and went and looked and found a number of interesting articles, and I'll just share this one. Art of the Americas Revisited. What does it mean to decolonize a museum? And this is the point I keep making, that museums are not, this is being put in a museum in this context in particular. I wrote here, this is entombed people, histories, and movements. Get museums to reflect on the dead and to tell their story as though as those living in power would have it be told. That's what I see happening here. Entombed people, histories, and movements get museums to reflect on the dead and to tell their story as those living in power would have it be told. And I think I did link this article in the show description so folks can come back and read it in its entirety. Just short, just quickly here, museums and universities are one of the tools responsible for the production of modern systems of knowledge and have helped to establish and maintain the control of knowledge and its production by the West, placing themselves as a very powerful epistemic technology. Only through the political activism and social movements of the 1960s and 70s in the US, criticizing museum displays of Native Americans, did universities and museums slowly shift their viewpoints to support the cultural self-determination of Native peoples. Like museums, the foundations of universities remain unshakably colonial. And what they argue in this article is so slick. One of the things that they argue is done is so slick, and it gets exactly, and I put the quotes separately here. I'm going to skip to these conclusions. Because, but I do encourage that more of these kinds of articles be read and engaged and taking more time with than I'm even doing here. In this context, of the hip hop 50th anniversary and the colonization of Black and brown people here in the United States and elsewhere. Um, let's see. Okay, here's one of the points I wanted to highlight. Western memory was constructed, preserved, and transmitted to future generations through the history of art, while objects with non European origins were largely represented in natural history museums, and only later did anthropological and ethnographic museums place non Western and non modern subjects elevated by the progressivist view into categories between the natural and the civilized worlds. That's exactly what I see happening with hip hop, by the way. I mean, that, again, said differently, this is not about commemorating Black people, Black women in hip hop. This is about entombing the dead so that they can be remembered as those in power want them to be remembered. And when this idea, we're not putting you're not in an art museum as art is defined by Western colonial standards. You're being put in one of those lesser natural history museums, Black history, hip hop history, as an anthropological and ethnographic museum where non-Western and non-modern subjects can be, quote unquote, elevated by the progressivist views between the natural and civilized world. So it's like saying this semi-savage has produced something in the context of our colonial authority that we find of value. And without changing one bit the material condition, in fact, enriching us, we can we can seemingly praise them. In fact, they are praising the hip hop world for producing an outlet for Black rage that doesn't upset Black relationships and actually increases the wealth and symbolic and intellectual authority of the colonial rule. I mean, it is. So as they said here, with respect to such identity building processes as because they talk, this article does I think a fascinating job of talking about, again, Like my old professor Ayeli Bakari told me at the Africana Studies and Research Center at the time under the directorship of its founding director, Dr. James Turner, the Western world needs African art to self identify as special, as beautiful, as powerful. They judge themselves by how much of their colonial artifacts they get to keep. Similar messages, similar points are made in this article, and they say here primarily that their interest is primarily not in what actually happened in history, but how we remember it. That's what is happening here. They don't give a damn about what Black people in Pan-African communities have done in the struggle against them, against their conditions. They care about how it's remembered as something that led to a new world, that that made things better, even as they're not, even as they're absolutely not. However, modern Eurocentric knowledge implies that culture, ethnicity, and race are fixed identities within imagined national borders. Consequently, a modern idea of the nation state with its linear notion of history, fueled through the Western process of industrialization, became the narrow perspective of the human progression and civilizing framework. Why I thought this point is so well suited to the point I'm making is that the article ends up talking about, again, how the world does not actually operate under, in reality, does not exist under the labeling of Western European imperialism. That we are only Nigerians, Cambodians, Black Americans, Panamanians because of European Western colonial rule. Underneath all of that, we're really something very different. Racially, ethnically, culturally, we're human beings that go beyond all of that. But what the museum does is allow for the European nation state to be reconceived as real, and the identities it imposes on people reified themselves, and then seen as the civilizing framework. So the very fact, as I'm seeing it, that hip hop is being institutionalized in mainstream media, in museums, in academic institutions, and et cetera and so forth, is because it is helping reaffirm the U.S. settler colonial project by reaffirming the U.S. as itself a geopolitical entity and the identities it creates, houses, and imposes as legit themselves. And then it gets to take credit for it. And then, as Josh Myers brought up when we talked about the 1619 Project, you're creating artificial time constraints. 50 years of hip hop, artificially ascribing it to a party at one party in the Bronx so that you can wipe away the Pan-African origins of it, the colonial context of it, its connectivity before, before and after that moment. And then you can isolate it as something that can be put into a damn museum at some point and used against the very people that produced it. So, just returning quickly to the series, no investigation of the influence of capitalism and corporations and media and ownership. There's only passing reference to any of this, but no investigation into it. A lot of talk about winning and talk of opening markets and businesses and deals with McDonald's. And then, as I note here, all of the women featured in this series, I looked them all up from Saweetie to Lotta to whoever. All of them are on the same three major labels: Sony, Warner, and Universal. So, again, we're only hearing from the people selected to be winners. A couple things I missed real quick, a couple points real quick that ultimately make my point. So Drew Dixon is brought in to talk about that wonderful moment where she inspires, which is one of my favorite songs, and at one point was going to be my wedding song, which was replaced more appropriately by Donny Hathaway. But Mary J. and Method Man's "You're All I Need." She created the idea and the concept for that. But what we don't get in this series, oddly, we get that she's removed based on her gender as a woman, that she doesn't get the credit she deserves and that she should have gotten, like other women, got more credit. But we don't hear a word about what she has said in another documentary that I think Dream did that one too. But she said in another documentary that that was the moment that Russell Simmons abused her. I think even R'd her. And again, which is why I'm assuming we don't hear his name at all in any of these. But even to bring him up to explain why we don't hear about him. So for all that is supposed to have been improved, he's still on the run, dodging charges, including the accusation of this woman here. They don't even mention it. I thought that was an odd moment. Then they make a reference to KRS-One, but don't make anything about talk about his numerous contradictions from Alex Jones to Eric Adams. They mention 360 deals, and this is where Wendy Day comes in. And I admit a contradiction here. Wendy Day, a white woman who, going back decades, is a legend for helping artists save themselves from horrific contracts, in part. I actually emailed her when I saw, I've never been in contact with her. But I do through my work with years ago with Paul Porter, Lisa Fager, the mighty struggler, continued success in her struggle against cancer. Wait a minute. I think somebody showed up to my house early. Oh, boy. Oh, well. But there's no discussion of Wendy. This is sort of my point about the hip hop activist part that's gotten erased. So they mention here that there is this thing called 360 deals that's having some sort of impact on the industry, but they don't really get into what it is. Again, the increased corporate consolidation and control over what artists are popular, what wealth is created, who, in terms of the artist world, gets to speak to their community. All of this is controlled by this ever consolidating group of white capitalist corporations that are themselves international conglomerates. But they don't talk about all of the long struggle of again, she's not a black woman, but of a woman like Wendy Day, who has helped countless artists. Admittedly, back in the day, my hyper nationalism, I avoided ever really trying to bond with it, because I was like, man, I don't want to be involved in praising more white folks. But she deserved it then, and she definitely deserves it now if people are going to talk about the 50th anniversary, and in terms of people who have tried to help artists specifically struggle against the 360 deal so they could get what little bit of money they're owed and what is due to them. Yeah, this person is early. My bad, everybody. I got to take a quick break and come back. But I'm going to come back with this Wendy Day point. Let's take a quick break. I'll be back in a second. Don't go anywhere. It's still I Mix What I Like. My apologies, everybody, but I can't. If people, anyway. Everybody, wait a minute. This Wendy Day piece. Anyway, support Black Power Media. Back in a minute. Yeah, keep me right there. Everybody, wait a minute. Well, everybody, wait a minute.
everybody, wait a minute. Everybody, wait a minute. Well, everybody, wait a minute. Everybody, wait a minute. everybody, wait a minute. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.
All right, everybody. Appreciate your patience. Appreciate you sticking around for the most part. Sorry for that interruption. Let me get everything back up and running here. What can I say? Definitely appreciate you, those who were able to stick around, and forgive that interruption once again. I appreciate that some of you appreciated the music interlude, and I hope some of you did like, share, subscribe, join our Patreon, all that kind of stuff. All right, let me just pick up where I was, because what I was getting to is that for all that is discussed, for what little is discussed in passing of this corporate relationship and artists not fully being properly compensated, and they briefly touch on this, but they don't really get into what does that mean. How does the industry work? How are these artists that we're seeing interviewed here selected for celebrity, for popularity? Is it just based on talent? Because again, I'm not debating anybody's talent, I'm not debating anybody's music or anybody's art. I'm only debating the debating the narrative that is being imposed here, that does not include the fact that the corporate world is still determining everything. And what is a corporation? And a euphemism for anonymity given to a mostly white male ruling elite who own everything. And I think without exception, every artist I looked up, even Rhapsody, is a Rock Nation artist. That contradiction, I think, has to be understood if we're evolving as a hip hop community and understanding what hip hop is. That someone that people love as an alternative, as even a radical, as a true MC, is herself associated with Rock Nation, which is itself associated with the most commercial black capitalist endeavors, white capitalist endeavors, this whole horrific relationship with the NFL, on and on and on. I mean, all of those contradictions would have to be understood and explored if we're to appreciate, I think, at a better level than the kind of what we're left with, which is unfortunately just sort of this vague black women taking control. And meanwhile, when the 360 deal comes up, again, she's not a black woman per se, but as a woman, Wendy Day has this long history. And if you don't know her, look her up. I should maybe try to get an interview, because I did email her, and I just out of a whim, I just looked her up. I'm not going to pull up the email, but the short of it was I just looked up her up, and I was like, damn, they don't even mention Wendy Day, and like even in passing, who has been fighting for artists' rights. So I emailed her and I said, I basically said, does this narrative bother you? What are you thinking about all this? And she said more or less, I don't think I'm being unfair here, that she more or less appreciates the celebration. She went to one of the ones in New York or something like, I can't remember. But she did acknowledge, she did say that, she's comfortable with her place in this. She's not looking for celebrity or anything like that. And that really wasn't my point. But she did say that I'm the only one to reach out and ask her. That in and of itself is absurd. For all of the podcasts, for all of the hip hop discussion, for all of the luminaries who are just, for all the scholars and activists, and that I'm the only one to reach out to Wendy Day to ask her what she thinks about all of this. Has anybody done more for artists around contracts? I don't know. And then the series does something else that's sort of that I don't know if bothered is the right word, but I guess it is the right word. When they bring up Dr. Dre and D Barnes, they make the appropriate point that D Barnes, and this is as close as the series gets to, I think, to doing what we need more of. Because they raised the question, how is it that D Barnes, this legendary hip hop journalist, is really only ever discussed in relationship to the fact that she got beat down by NWA and affiliated NWA affiliates or whatever, and by Dre. And then they note that her career goes into anonymity and Dre becomes Dre. And they highlight the 91, I think, article, that 1991 article that Dream Hampton wrote about this as being one of the few in print explanations of what happened. And they beat her up. I can't even remember what they were accusing her of or whatever they said that she would. And then they show a clip in this series. They do, this is powerful. They show MC Ren and Eazy-E and everybody in an interview being asked about D Barnes, and they say on camera, she deserved it. It should happen again. And they beat her up. Dre beat her up. But they don't follow their own logic. And this is the problem that I have with the narrative that's being reimposed. If the overall narrative has to be a linear progression from bad to better, to, or worse, to we've overcome, we've changed the world, women are now in control, voodoo, voodoo, voodoo. And as they end the series, we got women of all complexion, all doing their thing in hip hop. And all of them major commercial artists signed by the dominant three labels. All of them, I would argue, doing more or less the same thing. They do have the sister who they argue is challenging the weight and complexion and gender roles and getting some love. Okay, still major artists, still on a major label. So I don't know the catalog well enough to know to what extent a real other than is it. I don't know. I don't know. If a heavy set, dark skinned queer woman is performing, I don't know. I don't know her. I don't know what their content is. I just know they're a major label artist, and I'm just saying. But if they are just sort of parroting the same conspicuous consumption, black capitalist fantasy of overcoming and this, that, and the third, okay. But they can't follow the logic of, well, how does D Barnes get erased and Dre be where he is? You can't go too far, because then you would have to acknowledge that he's doing Super Bowl shows sponsored by his friend Jay-Z's Rock Nation, where Eminem is taking a knee, and that's the same label that's got Rhapsody on it. I mean, you'd have to get into those contradictions and explore a situation where in a changed world, Dre is still at the top, even more at the top, and black women are. All right, so I'm gonna wrap up here with where I found the most odd challenge to my own argument. Now, this brother had called me in 2020 to do an interview about my buying power book when it first came out. We did this extended conversation. It did not ever air on this program. Snippet, like a 30-second snippet, ended up on NPR's main news program one morning. But I did reach out to him and I said that he and his colleague did a great job with this. And I didn't even do the petty thing of bringing up the fact that our interview never aired. But from Code Switch on NPR, and I forgot who sent this to me, but shout out to you, because I did watch it. I listened to it and then read the transcript, which is linked in the show description. From Fight the Power to Advertising for the Power, hip hop turns 50. And I said, stop playing. And from almost all of the discussion that I've heard, this this comes closest to doing what I think needs to be done. And I'll summarize it here. They raised so AD Carson, Professor AD Carson, who in the link in the show description I presented with, is known as a hip hop professor at UVA, I think. He's brought on, and it's sort of him versus Tony Blackman, who's also been on the platform, legendary MC and artist out of DC, and who was interviewed here as because she's the first hip hop ambassador going 20 years back now, working for the State Department. So both Carson and Blackman are sort of juxtaposed to make the point that Carson raises in a more accurate and I think critical way, that what is really happening here when hip hop is being brought into the academy and institutionalized in the academy or by the state through UN diplomacy, and he makes the point, they get, simply put, he makes the point accurately, that they get more from it than we get from it. So in other words, as he points, I think he says it's not that hip hop got a professorial position, it's that the professorial world got hip hop. And that is exactly how I think it's best understood. Now, of course, this is still an NPR product, so it still had those same low tones and stylings and presentation to make ultimately white settler audiences comfortable. They are still the target audience. And it's two young, very brilliant and capable Black spokespeople having this conversation that itself can't follow too much of its own logic, but does more to raise these questions than I think I've seen in any other mainstream commercial spot, and many others for that matter. And then they ultimately end by making the point of doing something that or not so much humbly, I've been arguing for a long time. And I even had a couple issues with a couple artists and even friends of mine who have been offered and taken these positions as hip hop ambassadors for the State Department. And even at one evening had a very, I think, subtly tense smoke cipher out back of a show a couple years ago in DC, and Kokai is the artist, brilliant DC artist who had been a member of Opus Akabin. And years ago, I had invited them to my classroom when I was teaching at the University of Maryland, and I asked them while they were in my class, about this contradiction of being African-centered, progressive, very talented artists being hired by the State Department to go on these tours. And I've said, look, to me, it seems like a contradiction. I know you want to, who's getting more of what? And I felt like in this session years later after the fact, I felt like maybe I'm wrong. And if, should he ever hear or see this, no disrespect, but I thought Kokai I thought he was a little bit. And it was one of those moments where I let it go. I didn't want to, get into combative with him. I think Asheru was there. My man Parrish was there. Who else was there? But the point, and what Kokai's argument was at that moment was, no one knows what we do off stage and who we build with and how we build. So to say that just because we perform on the auspices or of the State Department that we're doing their bidding is mistaken. And I was simply just trying to raise, as I've always ever just simply tried to raise, this question of who benefits more. And I think Carson's way of putting it is exactly right. Hip hop doesn't get the State Department. The State Department gets hip hop. And whatever we think we're doing, any of us are doing off the record or behind the scene, it's that on the record performance that dominates the narrative. And that becomes the dominant narrative and dominates the context. So it's not like we do something. We don't. There's nothing we're doing beneath the surface that's counteracting that. And I get it. It becomes personal, and people feel defensive, and I'm getting it, and I understand that. But I can't help raise the question, and and I thought that this piece did a very good job of asking Tony Blackman and putting it to her and getting her response. What does it mean when you're doing this work? What about that contradiction? And I don't know if it's editing. I don't know to what extent it was edited, but if you read the transcript, I highlighted a part of it. I thought I did, but it's not even taking me there. Come on now, son. Where's the rest of the transcript at, son? Son. Oh, you know why? Because I don't have the right link. Okay, I put the right link in the show description. I don't have the right link for myself here. So let me pull this up real quick because I put the transcript. Yeah, that's right. Here's the link to the transcript. Stop sharing. Woo, woo, woo. Let me pull this up real quick. So this is the right link and it's in the show description. There we go. Now, why does it have? Okay, so they ask her, about this contradiction. Tony Blackman, this black woman from the United States, going on the, under the auspices of the State Department to in this case South Africa, and she says here, would you rather someone else do it than me, other than me? I justify doing this work as an American, not to say I'm here as a proud American, but to say that my grandfather and my great grandfather built the country that you come to know as America, and I come as a representative of my ancestors. And I immediately thought, see, this is a problem that I have with the narrative and with the success of individuals is again projected. Now, again, I don't know what she said in total, but the way it was presented in this piece is it just sounds like she's saying the collective doesn't need to win because I won. And then there's this, there's this, we built America. I don't know exactly how best to say this, but while I want to not diminish and I want credit for what my ancestors had to suffer, I don't want credit for building this. Or I want the credit to be understood explicitly and maybe only in the context of enslavement and colonization. So if she had said, the enslavement and colonization I suffered mirrors the enslavement and colonization you've suffered on the continent and produces a similarity and a diaspora that I'm trying to rebuild under the Pan-African lineages of a Biko and a Chris Hani and a Winnie Mandela. Okay, but this whole thing of I'm here and I'm better than someone else doing this, and I'm here representing the enslaved, shouldn't even say it this way, but the builders of this country. Anyway, that's just how I took it. But that I thought, but as Carson and Parker also come back to say in the piece, you could say Tony was working with the people too, but she had the stamp of the State Department hanging over her. AD also had the American pedigree lording over him while he was in South Africa, and that stung too. But he describes it a bit differently because he talks about being a man with no country and feeling the contradiction and why he refused to become a State Department rep when he was asked to do it. So that when he went to South Africa, as he talks about in the piece, he could go more authentically and legitimately as I'm putting it, a colonized African visiting the motherland filled with other colonized Africans, and he doesn't have to do it under this auspice of. So I thought they did a really good job in balancing the perspectives with Carson and Blackman. And laying it out in a way that NPR would allow it to air. And then they end even more strongly on the example that I've been one to raise myself, that When Hillary Clinton said, as the Secretary of State, openly, we're going to use hip hop for US diplomacy to make the US look better abroad, just like we did in the 50s with jazz, they come back to that very story or that point with more detail in this story here, getting into the details of Louis Armstrong and black and white jazz artists being sent around the world as emissaries of the State Department to do just that. And the contradictions he felt. His refusal, that is Armstrong's refusal initially to participate because of the what specific case? I can't remember. Check the link. Something that had happened specifically in Black America. He's like, I can't now go right over here and be doing. So he, some PR for the United States, though he did eventually do it. He felt this contradiction. He struggled with it. They made a play about it. I don't remember knowing about the play. A musical about specifically Louis Armstrong's experience that he performed in. And they make the real point beautifully, I thought, in this NPR piece, that while Louis Armstrong was being sent around the continent of Africa in the early 60s, he's literally days away from the CIA-supported and involved assassination of Patrice Lumumba. So the famous pictures they talk about, and I should pull it up here, of Louis Armstrong in Egypt with his wife, serenading his wife at the Sphinx. This article points out that this iconic picture takes place as part of a State Department sponsored tour. I think they said 11 days after Patrice Lumumba is assassinated. And I thought this was a brilliantly done and made point, because this is how I think it's best to understand what's happening, whether it's with a hip hop ambassador or with the hip hop narrative and the 50th anniversary, that while Black artists and image and celebrity is being distributed all around the world, Black people on the continent of Africa and elsewhere, and certainly here in the United States, are being abused. And yet the abuse gets almost no attention. And the handfuls, the very, 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 very limited few who rise up out of that and are selected by the very people creating the madness for celebrity and popularity, are then put back before us to tell us about how well they've done and how we should see our victory collectively in their individual success. That is sponsored, paid for, owned by the very entities that are creating the hostility and the inequality in the first place. It is to me a complete maddening situation. And that's it. I'll stop there. If you have any comments or questions, jump in, put them back in the chat. And if anybody wants to, I got a couple minutes, and if anybody wants to actually join me on screen, I'll put the link in the chat, and you can jump on and make your point on screen. And if you have any comments or questions, just please recycle them back at the top. Super chats obviously are highlighted automatically, but or at least put a at me in the chat so I can make sure to see it. Any comments, criticisms, queries, conundrums. But anyway, this is what I'm going to be, building on all semester as we start next week. But and also something that is just. So I'll just wrap. I just want to wrap with. Let me just wrap with where I started. That my issue is not with the individuals. It's not with the talent. It's not with the desire to celebrate. It's not with. I love all of that. I love all, I'm all filled with my own contradictions. I'm about to be at a go-go show probably within a couple days here. All of it. But this narrative that the world has changed, I think, needs to be questioned in terms of the ways in which, or the ways that we understand that change differently. And I understand it differently from the way it's being presented as this almost exclusive celebration without a recognition of the context and the politics beneath it. So for me, the narrative issue is that the narrative should read as follows: hip hop, a paradoxically beautiful Pan African cultural expression that emerged as an unsanctioned response and expression, was eventually, immediately, forcibly transfigured by the preceding colonialism, settler, internal, into what it has become in its popular form: a sanctionable expression of blackness and gender politics, given equally paradoxical credit for having helped create a world no one should want credit for. The paradox is simply that the material conditions of Black and brown people are as bad or worse than before. They are certainly not commensurate with the popularity and wealth generated by their labor and genius. The paradox is that we are hearing mostly from those who have been most rewarded by the state, the commercial advertising conglomerate owned world, to now be the lions telling the story of their own hunt from the perspective of the hunter. Still from the perspective of the hunter. Erased are hip hop activism, hip hop scholarship and its debates, including the institutionalization of hip hop studies in the academy. Erased is the assessment of hip hop journalism and its history, including somewhat of what was done in my work on Tucker, see Delores, that is. The conditions of the Bronx, the conditions of Black and brown people materially, the conditions specifically of Black women, all of these are actually erased or marginalized in favor of this celebratory moment that I find to be disturbing. So, okay. You need to write a myth of propaganda of hip hop book. You can include the updated some of your previously made arguments in it too. I hear you, but that just requires a discipline and focus and an organization that I struggle with. But yeah, reinventing the hip hop narrative, or maybe just the construction of it. I mean, it's just the construction of it from the beginning that. Thanks. Do you know why Boots wasn't invited to it? First of all, I don't know that he wasn't invited. I can assume because Boots is up here talking about strikes. Did you see him with Tandy the other day? He's up here talking about general strikes, communism. He's talking about the insufficient. I mean, what he's saying is I think as I interpret, he's saying there's nothing to celebrate. And then listen to the content of his now. Listen, now check this out. Now you want to talk about me being in my own selfish conspiracy. I just started watching the second season of the Showtime series about the Lakers in the 80s and Magic Johnson. If you all remember, the first criticism I had of that when that series started was that in the first, and I should go back and check me, the first year, the first season, when they play that track with the coup and the Roots, they only play Black Thought's lyric. I said my point was they're not playing Boots Riley's verse. They're only playing Boots' verse. I mean, Black Thought's verse. But this season, I feel like somebody got the message to them, and they're playing My Favorite Mutiny. They're playing the verse you hear is Boots' verse. And I was shocked when I heard it because it's bars. It's bars, and they played the whole joint. Hold up. It starts off with, his verse starts off with, "Death to the pigs is my basic statement. I spit street stories till I taste the pavement. Trying to stay out the pen where we face enslavement. Had a foolproof hustle till they traced the payments." Damn. Let me pull this up so you can read along with me because these are bars. I was like, I couldn't believe that this was death to the pigs. I was gripping my palm around some shitty rum trying to find Psalm number 151. Come on, that is beautiful. To forget what I'm owed as I clutch the commode. I read put down the bottle and come get the gun. Let's get off the chain like Kuta Kinte with a Mac 10. They want us gone like $1 in a crack den. Steadily subtracted seeds and stems, mind cloudy through the weeds and phlegms. Come on. Numbing my brain off that and them Jesus hymns. If we waiting for the time to fight, these is dims telling us to relax while they ease it in. We getting greased again. The truth is, I write it so cold, I freeze my pen. Damn, I'm Boots Riley. It's a pleasure to meet you. Never let they punk ass ever defeat you. And they even show him in image performing, it seems like, that verse. They got us on the corner wearing pleather and see-through, and y'all got minds they want to deplete you. Come on, man. I ain't just finna rap on the track. I finna clapping them back. And it's been staggered to the 500 years before Iceberg ever leaned back in the lag, before they told Rosa Black in the back, before the CIA told Ricky Ross to put crack in the sack, and Gil Scott traded rapping for smack. This beat alone should get a platinum plaques. I'd rather see 1 million of us ecstatic to scrap. Because if we blapping them back, we automatically stack. That's what I'm talking about. I was like, damn, that's why he's not, I would argue. You could even get away with it as an intro to a Magic Johnson series that don't do nothing to remind you of that introductory verse. But you can't have him sit down for a discussion of some hip-hop 50th anniversary celebration. Nope, no Dead Prez, not even a mention of Dead Prez. Ricky, Dead Prez don't currently have a mainstream contract. That's who was in this joint. You got to have a contract. They didn't even do it. I mean, so again, think of all the artists that we might want to see, particularly in a series about women. You know who I was looking for. She was performing this weekend at the joint. But there's no Moo Moo Fresh. There's no Sa Rock. I can't think of. There's more. There's many more that we could come up with who weren't there. But you had to have a contract. I mean, it was a contract. You got everybody. I looked them up. Everybody got a contract. Sony, Universal, Warner Brothers. So even when they were talking about at the end of the series how sisters are now they're not competing with each other in rap music. They're doing buddy tracks together. And now I looked them all. They're all on labels. Oh no, no Moo Moo Fresh. No Moo Moo Fresh, which to me is that's no name. Nope. She got a contract. You see her depicted. She's not interviewed. Ice Spice isn't interviewed. It's mostly what's her name? Lotto, Saweetie. I can't remember. You get your Queen Latifah bits and pieces, MC Light bits and pieces. I don't know. I still think I would love for somebody to investigate that contradiction because I just heard the song a couple days ago. MC Lights, I Want a Roughneck from back in the day. Like, that's a huge contradiction. We talking about misogyny and male violence, and you the track. And I remember there was a whole bunch of songs back at one point. I should go back and find them. Maybe some of you know about them. It wasn't just that one track. It was women there was a moment where there were women like, I don't want no punk ass man. I want a thug. No, she wasn't. So anyway, yeah, I mean, anyway, so again, but really, I don't really care about the contradictions of the artist so much, and I don't really, I'm less interested in the content here of the lyrics per se, as I'm interested in this narrative, this storyline of we have overcome and all this other kind of stuff. No, there wasn't. I mean, that's an interesting example too. Like there was no discussion of that. It was a discussion of, and I want to change that. I don't like that. I like. Let me do that. I like that one. But they mentioned TLC to point out that they were famous, but they were broke. But then they don't. But again, they don't really go into what the ongoing nature of this contractual theft. But look, let me. I can't. We are honored. Honored.
Hey man, I seen you put out the bat signal. You threw the hat up, and you was like, "Listen, come on in here, let's talk."
Come on, that's it. I did. So what's up?
Man, everything is good, man.
And everybody should see your conversation with Minister Server. I thought it was great.
Appreciate it. And that it is the thing. We are going to talk about, we got a bunch of things coming here on Black Power Media. I see with Kalanji, he's bringing a sister on for the ladies first.
Dream Hampton, yep.
Also on Thursday on the Remix Morning Show, I got some sisters coming through to talk about the ladies first documentary, which like,
and Rosa's going to be on with Piper, right?
Yep.
Piper. That's today.
Yeah, that's the day. It's a hip hop filled week.
It's a hip hop filled week. Yeah, that's what's up.
Yeah, but now what you were saying, a lot of it's real. Like when I was watching the documentary, I was like, it is a lot of other, like you said, a lot of the people that's on the labels are on there. It wasn't certain people. I was like, damn, what happened? I guess they couldn't get everybody on there, but like you said, it is somewhat the gatekeepers. Like, all right, this is who we gonna talk about and stuff like that. But it was a bunch of sisters. I was like, all right, where they at too? And they did actually have Iggy Azalea on there talking about the culture of vultures. But they didn't have her talking, but they was talking about culture vultures, how they came and just snatched up all the culture and everything and just ran with it.
Oh, right. And how when white women are twerking and stuff is one thing, but when black women do it, it's another thing. Yeah, right.
Yeah, but it was a hell of a week. I would say it's like on a birthday, when you celebrate a birthday, yeah, you celebrate all the good things, but you don't really talk about, okay, what needs to be fixed now? You know what I'm saying? How can we use this movement to kill the capitalism, this, that, and the third? It wasn't none of that. But I guess that's what birthday is about. You celebrate the birthday, the good parts, but don't really bring up the other parts of it. You know what I mean?
So I guess, but I hear you, but I guess my problem is that the birthday party is being thrown by. It's like if your birthday party is thrown by your enemy. It's like, would you, even if it was decked out, are you really trying to show up to that? Are you really trying to and watch them take credit for all that you've done? Like, wouldn't you kind of be like,
I think the smaller venues
I don't
got
want you
smashed
telling me
out.
happy birthday.
Maybe the smaller venues got smashed out by it, because you did have Poor Righteous Teachers performing, you did have Dead Prez performing at certain venues, but it wasn't the Rock the Bells or the real big venues that everybody was tuning into. But it was a celebration throughout different cities of different MCs and artists. Even I went to a event in the park where they had break dancers, they had DJs. See, a lot of them are just concentrated on the MCs. They're not talking about any of the other elements.
That's a good point.
So it's like, yeah, like you said, a lot of the labels are like, all right, let's talk about the MCs. That's where the money comes in. But let's not talk about the breakdancers, the culture, and all the other aspects. But I did like the documentary. I did. I ain't go front.
Again, I'm not judging as a documentary, it was. It's very well done. Dream is dope. I mean, she knows what she's doing. These people are not dummies. But again, similar to the point you're making about who's performing and where. That's not my point. There's always going to be great stuff happening. My point is this dominant story that's being told that black people were poor in the Bronx. They created hip hop, and now the world is all good. like, wait a minute.
Now.
I'm like, wait a minute. No, a few people made a lot of money, more white folks than black, but a few people made. But the communities, that's what I was saying. Like the South Bronx is still a mess.
Yeah,
black communities all over the country are still a mess. So who's benefiting here? Meanwhile, the wealthy are more wealthy than ever. So that's really all I'm saying.
Yeah, no, you got a good point. It's really time to make a plan now. It's like, all right, we celebrated, yay, let's plan. But who's going to be who's going to be the in the front runners to be like, all right, let's do this with this now. Let's who can you look at in the community? And I don't think it's going to be an entertainer. It's got to be somebody outside of entertainment to be like, all right, let's make these moves. And we can't look at these MCs to do it. Can we?
But again, that's sort of my point.
Mm-hmm.
So that was always my argument. This idea that because if you remember, for I know you know, but for a while, there was this discussion like, in that there are no more black and brown communities. We're just hip hop. We're a hip hop nation.
It's a culture.
So I kept saying, so okay, fine. If let's put aside the argument about this nationhood thing and accept the nationhood argument. Well, what kind of nation are we? Are we a colonized nation? Are we a capitalist nation? Are we a socialist nation? Are we a Pan-African? Like what kind of nation are we? And that part was always the part I never saw getting ironed out. So what did it mean to be a hip hop activist? But again, what would have been more helpful is if more of the narrative discussion could include the arguments and debates around what I was saying, hip hop activism, scholarship. What did all that mean? What happened at the 2004 political convention? I hope Rosa talks about that today. Like what happened with that history and before it and after it? What happened to this idea of politicizing the ideas of we are hip hop? Because without that, what does it mean? Then everybody's hip hop, and then you end up seeing even in that series, everything can be co-opted. And as long as black women aren't doing it, I guess it's all good. And but as they pointed out, when black women start doing the same thing, it becomes a problem. And that logic should extend to accumulating wealth, freedom, political power. When black people, women included, start doing that, it becomes a problem.
So teamwork make a dream work. Therefore, we need them to have the microphones, and then we need scholars like you and others to make the plans. Like, all right, let's do this now. I'm just saying, because it's like we can't look at the entertainers though.
No, that's the point I was trying to get at. It's the political activist world that needs to do it. It's not the hip hop world that's going to do it. That was sort of always my point. That's what I was trying to say. Like we can't engage anything as hip hop. I think we need to engage as organized participants in movements and organizations. That's what. Then if we do a hip hop show, that's fine. And if we produce artists and art, that's fine. But you're right. There's not going to be, so-and-so got some money, so-and-so got some fame for something totally unrelated. Now let's turn to them. So like even when they were saying Cardi B she said, I don't use my platform for politics, but then I do politics in my podcast and stuff.
It's like, what are we talking about?
First of all, even if she did radical politics, in all honesty, even if she was like a comrade in some organization I was in, I would tell her the same thing. Your public performance hurts your political efforts over here. Being even symbolically associated with the state, even unconsciously, undercuts the message as you deliver it to people when you're trying to do something political. Because even unconsciously, they're like, she's not trying to do nothing different. She was just doing a song about wiggling her ass and getting paid. So,
they're going to look at it like, yo, she's just in it for a check. She's just in it for this is the spotlight right now talking about politics. Let me come in. And nobody's going to take her serious in a way. Like, all right, I don't want to hear her about politics, talk about partying. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, it takes the right person to even
Or her
speak on it.
analysis is going to be insufficient. Like if you're not and if you're not exercising your analytical brain, or your if you're not exercising your analysis in the same way you would exercise a muscle or a craft, you're not going to improve. So you can't like spend your whole day doing, writing rhymes and performing, and then say, I'm gonna run over here and do a quick commentary and a podcast and expect that the analysis is going to be keeping up with those who do that. So if anything, like, I'm not gonna pick up a mic and start doing a show. She shouldn't necessarily start picking up a mic and doing a show.
Yeah, it's funny. We do appoint people with celebrity who are most famous. We'll give them an ear, but other people will be like, nah.
And we're not the ones giving them the ear. That's also what I'm saying. Netflix is giving them the ear. This and that advertiser is giving them the platform to speak politically. They're the ones. Again, I'm like I was saying when people were getting on Ye and Kyrie. I'm less concerned with what they're saying about Jews than I am with you asking them for their thoughts about Jews. Like, that's the problem.
Yeah.
Like, why are you asking Kyrie Irving? Like, what is it? And it doesn't matter. I'm not saying that he can't know because he's a basketball player, but I'm saying he's only there because he is a basketball player. He's not there to give an analysis of the Middle East.
Yeah.
He's there to talk about what he did. So don't. If you don't want
to, misdirection. It's misleading. Misleading. Yeah. The media misleads you to a certain person, and then we listen to them, and we be like, "Well, why ain't they say this?" Because they don't know about this. And then we get mad as the people, like, "Why ain't they talk about this? Why ain't they do that?" They don't know about that. So I feel like we really, if we're talking about this being a nation, if we're talking about this being a culture, if we're talking about moving upward, then if we're just giving them music, giving them businesses to keep this whole, system running, then we're not helping. So if we really want to have this somewhat of a nation, like you're saying, it's like we got to come with the professors. We got to come with the scholars. We got to come with the different people. Like, all right, what are we trying to do with this? If we are trying to find insurance for the rappers that's elderly, if we're trying to move and have a nation, if we're trying to take it to the next level instead of just having history museums, then what are we really doing with this? Because we have a huge platform. So I think it needs to be egos aside. It needs to be like, all right, how can we take this to the next level? And some of these scholars need to approach the hip hoppers, because they're not going to approach the hip hoppers. Ain't going to approach the scholars. And if they do approach certain scholars, then it's just going to be the scholars that's bigging up what they're doing already. So I don't know.
So listen, I'm messing up today's hip hop programming because I forgot that at 12 o'clock we're having a discussion about football and politics. So I know you're going to be around for that, because I know you can't wait to hear us talk about soccer.
Oh, yes, no doubt. But I had to just come on here and pop on with you. I appreciate it. You put the call out like, yo, here's somebody want to come up here and speak. I was like, hey, listen, I talk about hip hop all day. Stop playing. But I appreciate what you're doing and taking it from just looking at it one direction and looking at it from another perspective of what's really going on. Because it's a lot that's good. Yeah, we celebrate and we love hip hop. As you say, it's contradictions. There's a lot of stuff that we love and there's a lot of stuff that ain't good. But I still see a light at the end of the tunnel. There's still certain things we can help do to make this better than what it is. So I appreciate what you're doing here. Big up to all the people out there. Make sure y'all tune in the morning for the Remix Morning Show as we get into some more stuff. And that's what it is. Appreciate you, boy.
Right on. Thank you very much. Appreciate you. Thanks, Ear Doctor. Thanks a lot. And definitely check the Sundays he did with Minister Server, where they had this conversation as well. And I actually I love that we have this platform. I love that Dreamhampton is going to be here later. I love that all these other perspectives can be heard. And I get to throw mine in the mix as well. You sent Ear Doctor a link for a musician. Okay. Ear Doctor, check for that link. From Renee. Shout out to Sister Renee. Are you gonna be on EYL again? You coming back? Anyway. That was a fire show Friday too. That was hilarious. Must watch television. Okay. I guess we can wrap it there, everybody. This is a good question. I always define culture very simply. I know there's a lot of good ones. Yeah, why not? I don't know. Yeah, why not? Um, for me, culture is simply a worldview, and that what we talk about in terms of hip hop or singing and dancing, these are cultural expressions. They are expressions of a pre-existing worldview, and then how that worldview is defined, and explained, or determined, or constructed is I think another part of the discussions. But that was why I was always saying, like, hip hop is not itself its own culture. It is not its own nation. It is a set of expressions emanating from African culture, Pan African experiences here in a colonized setting, and has to be understood as such. This idea of giving it this level of autonomy and nationness, I think, has been part of what has led to a lot of this confusion. And because it's not discussed, and all those debates are not discussed in these dominant narrative discussions, we don't have the ability to investigate that. I remember I was at a conference years ago, and it was even asked, should hip hop be studied? Should hip hop studies exist independently or within Black studies departments? And there was like people, I don't remember what percentage, but there was a strong percentage of people who disagreed with me when I said hip hop should absolutely be housed within Black and Africana studies programs. It is an Africa. It is a product of the African world experience and can only be understood as such. So this independent, and that's why I love what they were saying in that article about the museums and the genreification of everything. It's a colonial, it's for colonial processes. And if you can take hip hop out of the Black experience, you can start to derace it, erase the context, and create these narratives that I think we're still struggling with to this day. I remember thinking, I'm trying to riff off of what Glenn Ford used to say about journalism, that there should not be schools of journalism, because he understood that schools of journalism were themselves founded initially by the mainstream newspapers who didn't want to pay for the training of their future employees. So they put that off on colleges to do it, making universities, again, subsets of corporate interests. And Glenn Ford used to say there should be no schools of journalism. Journalism should be a subset of English departments, which was also his way of taking a shot at how people can't read and write and speak properly, which I thought was funny too. But that's how I felt about hip hop. That hip hop should, of course, be a subset of Black and Africana studies, because you can't. There is no study of hip hop absent. It should be a track within Black studies courses. Yeah, college is a job training now. I get it. I get that, but um, yeah, Friday was African. You don't know as much as you think you know. Uh, yeah. And again, I'm not judging any of the artists for their content, their music. I don't listen as much. It doesn't even matter. I don't, that part. I mean, there's something to be said about the content and what makes content palatable for a colonial setting. But oh man. Um I feel like you mean this to be a compliment, but is it? I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that. I don't uh, I would place it under jazz, considering that it's a direct evolution of the system. Certainly hip hop has elements of jazz, but I don't think it's just a direct descendant of jazz. It's as much a direct descendant of traditional Africanisms and oral traditions and funk. To me, I still think Ricky Vincent's Funk book does as good a job as any of showing the lineage and he literally maps out and shows you how hip hop fits within these different traditions. But even jazz, like again, just like my godfather says, and as I just saw was also said, I think by um Ahmad Jamal, may he rest in power, that jazz is not the right name. It's either African. Well, Jamal said American classical music. My godfather says Black classical music. I don't like the American part, but it's Black American classical music. But it has itself been genred into jazz, so it could be marketed, separated from the Black experience, marketed and performed and sold to and by everybody but Black people. By the way, uh, Dr. Clark Lewis said the same thing or made a similar point, and I think also missed the point during our panel Friday. She made a similar, said something similar to something along the lines of hip hop is similar to jazz and in it being Black, and I said, but similar to jazz, you can't make money off of it performing in the United States. And why do we want, and look at what happened with jazz? The same thing. Miles Davis and others were already talking about in their lifetimes. I got to go downtown to play a version for the white folks, and then I go uptown to play what I want to play. I got to perform a version of my expression that satisfies white audiences or sales, and then I do something separately. Now with rap, more than anything, as a culture, as an element of hip hop, rap has been that line has been blurred so much by the commercial form that the version Black artists think they're performing for their own audiences is really the version that's been constructed for white audiences. That's, I think, if anything, the worsening subtlety in the difference, where it could be clear in terms of jazz who was performing which version for what. With rap, I think it's less clear now, and I don't think that's to the benefit of Black or artists or communities. Yeah, Jamal was a genius. And he died earlier this year, as did Dave of De La Soul, who sampled Jamal on Stakes is High, one of the best tracks in hip hop history. And shout out to that dude on Digging the Crates. He put me onto that fact on one of his brilliant video essays. That dude is sharp. And I didn't know he plays bass for, among other things, Nas's live band, too. So, yeah, Max Roach also said he said what threatened the white folks was that with hip hop was that you could hear the revolution in the drums, was his direct quote. You could hear, and it was that beat. And that's why white folks are scared of go-go music. And that's why go-go can never be perfectly co-opted. Like my man Scott Brown says, go-go is the last truly authentic Black cultural expression on the planet. I'm going to check him and see if I got that right, but I believe he said it that way. And I believe it. The last free, uncolonized Black expression on the planet. That jungle music. Exactly. The Jungle. Shout out to Alice Coltrane, no doubt. All right, everybody, let me go. Let me take a break. Come on back at 12 o'clock. We're going to get it. We got our roundtable coming back for some politics and sport. There's a lot going on in that overlapping reality of politics and sports. So come on back at 12 o'clock. Come back throughout the rest of the day for all the other great content coming. Rosa Clemente is going to be here. Dream Hampton is going to be on the platform. Shout out to my comrades bringing you a full day of brilliant programming here. Unfortunately, for a while, this is going to be my last Monday morning. So at least live. GIU, I think, is going to reconstitute and do some pre-recorded stuff. But stay tuned. Make sure you got the bell rung. Make sure you like, share, subscribe. Join our Patreon, blackpowermedia.org. Go back and watch all of our other content. All the links in the show description. RBI, how'd I do, man? I'm trying to get RBI to come through and check me on all of this. And I know you was killing it last night. That's the only thing. How are them shows, man? I know the show. I heard Mumu Fresh tore it down last night. Not that that's a shock, but I did get a direct report, live and direct, I think as it was happening, that shout out to you, Jay, the JBs forever. Right on. Yeah, man, 12 o'clock. RBI, I want you to come through. No, come through. You missed the show. Well, I want you to come through and let's talk about all of this. Muma was at the show last night, the 50th celebration at the African American Historical History Museum, I think is where they were, right? Somewhere down there. I know it was. I saw the lineup. You know, I just can't be out that late. And I need a seat. That's my problem. I have not earned the VIP status that I now need if I really want to be outside. That's really the problem. I can't afford it. I haven't earned it. So I just, I know you did, man. I mean, I know, man. And I know it was dope. Where can we find our RBI show online? Follow him on Instagram, WPFW, but he's performing all the time. He's always performing somewhere I can't be. I'm trying to get him to come through here at some point. I'm trying to hire him because I want him to be a permanent installation here at BPM. We need to get more Patreon subscribers for that, though. I do be pissing people off, but you know what though? They can't. There's no defeater for the arguments, though. I know they get mad at me, and I don't know why. I'm not angry with them. But and if somebody could defeat the argument, I'm happy to be defeated. Asheru, out of nonchalant, DJ Cool, Diamond Doe. Oh, I did see that. I saw Odyssey was going to be there. That dude is, god damn, he's a monster. Asheru is, man, nonchalant, DJ Cool. I know it was fire. Where's the recordings at? I can believe I missed it. I be missing everything. And I know I be missing it. But if I'm there, the only problem is if I'm there, I'm just going to be in pain. I'm going to be angry. I'm going to be uncomfortable. I'm going to be like frustrated by the time I find parking. It's just so much. And then I get there, my back hurts, my feet hurts, my shoulders hurt, my neck hurts. I got to stand there. I can't get a drink in time. I know it was crazy. They're forthcoming. All right, man. I hear you. Sometimes they get angry. Sis got a little upset on the panel Friday. It was kind of funny. My daughter and I had a little laugh at that. She was like, she got mad at you. I was like, yeah. But did she prove me wrong? No. I'm not playing it. Look. I'm not innocent. I just don't come with any hostility. But we do disagree. And I say when we disagree, and people hear the word disagree and think that you're being hostile. I'm not being hostile. We just disagree. But I'm definitely not innocent. You're right. I'm not innocent. I've made plenty of mistakes. I'm socially awkward. I'm quick-tempered. More so back in the day. So I get it. I'm definitely not innocent. I'm not always sober. That's a flaw. That could be checkable. We got to be real with that. Sometimes they catch me in moments, couple drinks in. Dr. Kemet Shockley, I'm going to be forever praising Dr. Kemet Shockley for his humility. because I definitely was wrong with that dude one time. My argument was right, but my behavior was not. And he gave me a pass. I gotta give him out because I've taken a few. He gave me one. Dr. Kemet Shockley lived up to his name and his genius. Tony Blackman, Sub Z, Enoch, God's Illa. Oh! Shout out to former Morgan State students. And did I save him from a contract, from one of them from a contract? They were going to sign a contract at one point that I actually suggested they not sign. Did they sign that contract? Because I was like, look at this contract here. You're not going to make no money. Once you divide up that advance and pay it back, ain't going to be no money. Shout out to Big G. Man, Big G going to be out here, though. Backyard going to be out here in these tree-lined streets. Two-Tone Jones. Man, that dude is nice as a mug, too, boy. DC be talented as I don't know what, man. Shout out to DC, man. DC be talented as a bug. As a bug. Somebody tell. Shout out to DC, man. Yeah, that show, I'm sure that show was bananas. Cold Duck. I had a couple Cold Duck nights. Ripple, Thunderbird, Cisco. You know. All right, RBI. I told you, get ready to get bothered. I'm about to be harassing this dude. Everybody was there. Oh, what up, Vicky? Everybody. I know that's right. That's it. All right, I'm going to do a goodbye for real. Let's do the white people goodbye. Let's do the white people goodbye. See you back at 12 o'clock and all throughout the day, throughout the platform. Thanks, everybody, for coming through. Peace if you're willing to fight for it, like Fred Hampton used to say. And I will catch you next time at some point here at I Mix What I Like, about 12 o'clock specifically. And then, but make sure you've got the bell rung so you don't miss all the stuff coming throughout the day and days to come on the platform. A lot is happening. So, yeah, let's get out of here, and I will catch you next time. Thanks, everybody.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. I mix what